After the bankruptcy, everyone assumed he would take the money and run, given his handsome face and notorious love for wealth. He spent every day living it up on his CEO wife's dime, yet strangely enough, he wanted to stay and help her rebuild her empire. He figured a small share of her future success would grant him total financial freedom, but he had no idea her bankruptcy was actually a facade. Our story truly begins when he transmigrated into this novel, arriving just as the plot reached its grand finale. The beautiful CEO was the villainess who had already been defeated by the protagonist, and he remembered the final words written about her. The only thing Bai Ningbing had left was the husband lying in that bedroom, which, to be honest, wasn't much of a prize. Along with him were her expensive watches and designer clothes, but Ningbing knew the bitter truth of her situation. She was certain this man, who only ever spoke to her when he wanted money, would soon vanish with her remaining valuables. She was destined to end up with nothing. He rubbed his temples, thinking of his supposedly bankrupt CEO wife, and let out a long, slow sigh. To be fair, Ningbing had treated him quite well since their marriage. Now that she had hit rock bottom, he felt too guilty to simply grab the cash and disappear. At the very least, he had to wait. He told himself he would stay until she had a stable income or a new career. After a short while, once he had cleared his head, he got up and began to tidy the messy house, a task long overdue. It took him 3 full hours to cram everything into a corner of his room, where the items were now piled high. There were over 100 watches and 80 designer suits. In that moment, he desperately wished the clothes were watches instead. After all, watches are much easier to sell than secondhand suits. He had woken up at 2 in the afternoon, and feeling his stomach growl, he began rummaging through the wallet he found on the coffee table. He didn't even bother checking the kitchen. They had only moved in 2 days ago, and the situation was quite clear. Neither of them knew how to cook, so the kitchen was bound to be empty. Fortunately, the apartment Ningbing rented, while small, was in a decent neighborhood with plenty of restaurants downstairs. He headed out and grabbed a simple bowl of noodles. Recalling the sparse supplies he had seen in the bathroom earlier, he decided to take a stroll through the supermarket. He returned carrying a bag full of daily necessities, having thoughtfully picked up everything Ningbing would need as well. He chose the colors and styles based on what he remembered her liking, and then he set to work cleaning the house. Opening the door to Ningbing's room, he found it nearly empty, save for a few items on the desk and bookshelf. Aside from a bed and the bare essentials, there was nothing. He sighed, feeling for a woman raised in such luxury. It was impressive she could endure this life at all. He looked around and began to tidy up as the hours ticked by. By the time the entire place was finally in order, it was already 10 o'clock at night. He finished washing up, feeling satisfied. He set his late-night snack on the coffee table, ready to enjoy it at last. But just as he opened the packaging and was about to take the first bite, the sound of the front door opening made him look up abruptly. He found himself staring into eyes as clear as autumn water. The woman at the door watched him with an expressionless face. As her gaze swept across the room, a flicker of surprise crossed her eyes before her focus returned to him. He took the opportunity to study her as well. She was stunning, the kind of beauty that justified every superlative the author had used. Under Ningbing's gaze, he unconsciously gripped his chopsticks, feeling a sudden wave of nerves. After all, he was an imposter. He wondered if someone as sharp as Ningbing would notice her husband wasn't quite himself. Her eyes seemed to see everything. "Did you hire a cleaner?" she asked, her voice flat. "Do you still have enough money?" There was a hint of scrutiny in her tone. He shook his head instinctively. "No, I tidied it up myself." "You did?" she repeated. "Yes, by myself," he confirmed. Ningbing stared at him, her face filled with utter disbelief. After a moment of silence, she looked away first. "Is the money enough?" "It's enough," he replied, then habitually asked, "And you?" He regretted the question the moment it left his lips. Ningbing looked at him with renewed surprise and slowly replied, "It's enough." Following that brief exchange, a heavy silence fell between them. Ningbing glanced at the food he was eating and suddenly spoke. An apology slipped out before he could even react, and following her gaze, he quickly shook his head to clarify that everything was fine. "You have nothing to apologize for," Ningbing said as she walked over and sat on the other sofa, immediately bringing up the matter of their assets. The situation was handled. Though their properties were gone and nothing much remained, we see that at least the slate was clean. There are no debts, so don't worry. I have 30,000 left, and once this is settled, I'll find a way to earn more. She noted he should still have 60,000 on his card, and since she'd prepaid 6 months of rent, he was secure for now. "If you want a divorce, I'll give you another 20,000. You can stay here until you find a new place of your own." He realized then that Ningbing was being more than fair. She was doing everything humanly possible for him despite their circumstances. Of their remaining 90,000, she was willing to give him 80,000 and let him keep the roof over his head. She wouldn't even ask for his luxury watch or clothes, leaving herself with almost nothing. Seeing his silence, she spoke again. "I'll share my future earnings with you every month, at least 3,000. Does that sound fair?" she asked softly. She admitted the future was uncertain, but promised that if she ever rose to power again, she would truly compensate him. He immediately shook his head in refusal, but seeing this, Ningbing suddenly fell into a heavy, somber silence. Realizing his gesture might have been misunderstood, he quickly tried to explain himself to his distant wife. "No, that's not it. I don't want a divorce, and I don't need your money. My savings are enough for now, really." He told her he had accepted their new reality and would live frugally while earning his own way. To be honest, he just wanted to ease her burden. Ordinary families don't actually spend that much, he added, but she looked confused. You don't want a divorce? But yesterday you said. It was then he remembered that, in a fit of rage the day before, the original owner of this body had called her useless and demanded a split. His face stiffened. That was just the alcohol talking. I didn't mean it. I've had time to think clearly now. I can't leave you at a time like this. Since we're married, I'll carry my weight. Don't worry about me. I can take care of myself. In fact, I might even be able to take care of you, he said, the words hanging in the air between them. Ningbing's gaze grew even more peculiar, but she didn't press him further, simply stating that if he didn't want a divorce, they could drop the matter for now, and he could just let her know whenever he changed his mind. Then, she headed to the bathroom. He lowered his head awkwardly and continued eating, but we see him pause when he hears Ningbing stop just outside the bathroom door. She stood there for several seconds, likely noticing how different the place looked after his cleaning, before the sound of running water finally began. By the time he finished his meal, Ningbing had finished washing up. There was no awkward scene, just a quiet thanks and a wish for a good night. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling as though he were in a dream, before taking a moment to organize his thoughts once more. After washing up, he returned to his room, opened his laptop, and applied for a personal shop on a secondhand market website before finally sleeping. The next morning, he woke up at 6:30 out of habit, gathered the ingredients he'd bought the day before, and started some porridge. While the pot simmered, he headed downstairs to buy some steamed buns and fried dough sticks, returning just as the house was waking up. Ningbing happened to open her bedroom door at that exact moment, looking up to see him standing there with breakfast in his hands. She instinctively rubbed her eyes, likely thinking she was seeing things, as he greeted her warmly and told her he'd bought breakfast. He mentioned the porridge was cooking too and told her to go wash up before heading into the kitchen to check on the stove. He ignored the look of utter astonishment Ningbing sent his way. To be honest, her confusion was entirely justified given his past behavior. Knowing they had both been staying up late, he had specifically prepared red date and red bean porridge to help restore their energy. Once it was ready, he ladled out 2 bowls, arranged the buns and dough sticks on plates, boiled some eggs, and prepared a side dish. When Ningbing finally emerged from the bathroom, she was greeted by the sight of a breakfast table that could almost be called a feast. It was a scene that should have felt warm and domestic, yet Ningbing felt nothing but a growing sense of suspicion and unease. She knew her husband all too well. In 3 years of marriage, he had never once cooked or touched a single household chore. Even the background checks she'd run before their wedding never mentioned these skills, leading her to wonder if he had been wearing a mask. He simply told her that since the servants were gone and it was just the 2 of them now, it was time he started doing his part. He explained that since money was tight, they couldn't always eat out, and while his cooking wasn't gourmet, it was edible. He told her she was welcome to eat at home if she didn't mind, which prompted Ningbing to ask if he'd lied to her grandfather about his skills. After posing the question, Ningbing picked up her spoon and took a bite of the porridge. He paused for a moment, caught off guard. He laughed it off, claiming his skills couldn't compare to their old cook's, and he hadn't wanted to embarrass himself in front of her grandfather. It was a reasonable enough excuse, and Ningbing nodded, admitting the taste was actually quite good. To be honest, she seemed pleasantly surprised. As he watched her eat with her usual elegance, he realized that asking a woman raised on the finest cuisine to eat street food was quite a leap. Once breakfast was over, Ningbing offered to help carry the dishes to the kitchen, but he quickly stopped her, insisting he could handle it. He told her he would do the washing up and that she should focus on her own work. She still had many family assets to settle, after all. She mentioned she likely wouldn't be back until evening and told him not to worry, but to call if anything happened. Then, she departed. Once Ningbing was gone, he finally felt a sense of relief. Even in her reduced circumstances, her noble aura remained entirely intact. That invisible pressure she radiated was always lingering. If he hadn't dealt with powerful people in his past life, he might have buckled under it. He had a busy day ahead of him as well. He needed to buy household essentials and start photographing his luxury watches and clothes to sell. He looked at the pile of items, realizing that selling these would provide him with his first real bit of working capital. With so many high-end goods to list, he estimated he would soon have about $70,000 in funds to start his new life. Beyond that, he needed to research the local internet culture and decide how to return to his old profession. Yes, he had a plan. In his previous world, he had been a web novelist. Though he studied interior design in college, he chose not to make it his primary career. He had preferred writing, taking occasional freelance design jobs for extra cash, and had lived quite comfortably. After washing the dishes, he set out. He headed out with a shopping list, and since he wasn't one for window shopping, he returned quickly to set everything up and start the photos. He spent the entire day working on the listings until evening fell. By then, he was utterly exhausted from the constant movement. After finishing the watch photos, he heated up some leftover buns for a quick meal before retreating to his bedroom to study the local web novels. By this point, he was too physically drained to keep moving, so he decided to switch to some mental labor for a few hours. 2 hours later, we see him clap his hands in satisfaction and drain his coffee. He had discovered that the web novels here were slightly less developed than in his old world. It was a golden opportunity to rewrite his past works even better than before. Suddenly, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. He hesitated, then hurried out in his slippers to check. He had realized that morning that the door hadn't been deadbolt. Ningbing was likely used to villa security and forgot this place required it. As she hung up her coat, he greeted her and mentioned that he'd noticed the door was left unlocked the previous night. He explained that while villas have security teams, a place like this needs to be manually locked to keep the burglars out. She simply acknowledged him, and since they were still essentially strangers, he felt the need to keep the conversation going. He asked if she had eaten and mentioned he'd bought more supplies, offering to pick up anything else she might specifically need. She replied that she didn't need anything for now, and just like that, the conversation reached a rather abrupt end. Only after he returned to his room did Ningbing turn on the lights. She took a quiet walk through the kitchen and bathroom. The apartment felt different today, filled with new items that gave it a sense of life. It seemed he really intended to stay. To her, he seemed like a completely different person. Meanwhile, he was focused entirely on cleaning up his cluttered laptop. The original owner of this body had been a decent student in high school, but he had clearly slacked off during his college years. The laptop was painfully slow, so he began clearing out the junk while investigating what the previous owner had left behind. Eventually, he stumbled upon a photo folder containing many subfolders. Most were just selfies of the original owner. There were a few family photos, but one folder stood out with a name made of random gibberish. He clicked it open. Inside were photos of him with a woman who looked like a socialite. She was beautiful, though not exactly his personal type. She had a smile that projected a certain innocent fragility. Seeing how intimate the two of them looked in the pictures, he felt a genuine shiver of worry. He quickly checked the dates and breathed a sigh of relief. They were all from before the marriage. After seeing a few more photos that weren't quite as intimate, he quickly deleted the rest. By now, he finally remembered who this woman was. She was the original owner's girlfriend from his university days, a wealthy socialite. Since they had broken up so long ago, there was really no reason to keep these. It was lucky that Ningbing wasn't the prying type. Otherwise, these photos would have been a ticking time bomb. Once the computer was finally cleaned up, it was nearly 11 o'clock. He let out a long yawn and collapsed onto the bed to sleep. The next morning, we see him waking up even earlier than the day before. Instead of going out for food, he decided to whip up some fried rice and 2 side dishes. When Ningbing eventually emerged from her room and saw the spread, she looked at the hearty breakfast in surprise, asking if he actually knew how to cook. He admitted that while his repertoire wasn't exactly vast, he could handle basic home-cooked meals. He told her it wasn't gourmet, just edible, and hoped she wouldn't mind. Ningbing took a small bite. She noted that it was actually quite good. He was pleased she liked it, but then she mentioned she'd be coming back for lunch, which caught him off guard. He froze for a split second before quickly recovering, asking what she'd like to eat. She told him she'd eat whatever he made, though she preferred rice. He suggested sweet and sour pork ribs, stir-fried eggs with tomatoes, and egg drop soup. He asked if that would be enough to fill her up. She assured him it would be fine, telling him not to worry about it. A little later, Ningbing climbed into a car waiting at the neighborhood entrance. The driver was her assistant, Gu Qinghan, a childhood friend chosen by her grandfather. As soon as she settled in, Qinghan handed her a paper bag, reminding her to eat her breakfast. Ningbing politely declined, saying she'd already eaten. She explained that she'd had the fried rice Xiaoyu made. Qinghan froze mid-motion, the bag still extended in her hand. She was utterly shocked, asking if Xiaoyu actually knew how to cook. Ningbing admitted it was the first she'd heard of it too. Yesterday, he'd made some porridge, which she thought was a rare miracle. She had assumed his claims about cooking were just empty boasts, but then today, he had actually produced a full breakfast. She even mentioned she was returning for lunch because he promised to cook more. Hearing about this unusual behavior, Qinghan frowned, wondering if he was plotting something. She reminded Ningbing that they used to stay out of each other's way and that he was usually useless. Besides, hadn't he been demanding a divorce? She noted that she had already finished the research for the proceedings. She wondered why the process had suddenly stalled. Ningbing looked up, a thoughtful smile playing on her lips as she considered the situation. She explained that he no longer wanted a divorce, claiming he had accepted their life and intended to earn money so she wouldn't feel so much pressure. Ningbing leaned back against the seat, her tone unreadable. Qinghan chuckled, asking if he simply couldn't bear to see her suffer anymore. She mused that if he truly intended to share her burdens, perhaps he wasn't so bad after all. But we must remember his track record. He had been idle in university and spent 2 years of marriage doing nothing but wasting money. To change his mind overnight seemed a bit suspicious. Qinghan wondered if hardship was finally revealing his true character. Perhaps his conscience had simply caught up with him at last. After all, you never truly know a person until things get difficult. They had seen plenty of people turn their backs lately, but maybe Xiaoyu was different. Maybe he was the type whose integrity only shines during a crisis. Ningbing simply replied, perhaps, deciding to wait and see since he wasn't causing trouble. Meanwhile, we see Xiaoyu spending his entire morning busy with his clothes. He had over 80 outfits to photograph and sort through. Since he couldn't wear them all, he decided to keep 10 for appearances and sell the rest to buy more practical clothing. To be honest, it was a sensible plan. 2 hours later, he was only halfway done. He glanced at the clock in the living room and realized it was already 10 o'clock. Realizing he needed to buy groceries, he quickly tidied the clothes, threw on a jacket, and headed out. Soon, he was leaving the supermarket with 2 heavy bags. As he crossed the street, he suddenly heard someone calling his name. He turned to see a beautiful, elegantly dressed woman approaching him. Upon closer inspection, he realized this was the exact woman from the photos he had seen last night. She rushed over the moment he looked back. She cried out, asking how he had ended up like this. Xiaoyu looked down at his plain clothes and the grocery bags, feeling quite confused. He asked her what the problem was and why she was even there. The woman looked at him with an expression of deep, dramatic affection. She urged him to leave Ningbing and return to her side, promising she could provide him with a much better life now. She claimed it hurt her to see him suffer. She insisted she would take excellent care of him. If it weren't for the original owner's memories, he might have actually been moved by her performance. This was Lu Ruyan, the second daughter of the Lu group and the original owner's ex-girlfriend. A charming figure, or so she seemed. In reality, she had enjoyed his devotion while secretly mocking his desire to marry into wealth. Despite her riches, she had never truly respected him. She had never spent a single cent on the original owner. Instead, he paid for everything while she treated him like a personal servant. Full of superiority, she only put on this act of deep affection when Ningbing appeared, hoping to convince him to reject the marriage proposal. The original owner had been truly sincere, skipping meals and wearing old clothes just to save money for her, while she only wanted to play games. She toyed with him, but fortunately, he remained rational enough not to fall completely into her romantic trap. In fact, we learned that back then. He had almost rejected Ningbing. It was only by chance that he discovered Ruyan's true colors, which finally broke his heart and changed him. Because of that betrayal, he decided that only money could be trusted, eventually becoming the shallow man who cared for nothing but spending. One could say this woman was responsible for at least half of his life's tragedy. And now, as she approaches him again, it certainly isn't out of love. Whatever her hidden agenda was, it was definitely malicious. In the past, Ningbing was someone she could only look up to with envy. But now that Ningbing has lost her power, Ruyan likely thinks that stealing her husband away would be the perfect way to strike another blow. Perhaps she had even darker plans for Ningbing. Xiaoyu simply shook his head, telling her he wouldn't go and that she should just leave. Ruyan was stunned, asking why he would stay when Ningbing was now a failure who would only make him suffer. "What do you see in her?" she demanded. Xiaoyu replied calmly that being a couple means sharing both joy and hardship. As her husband, he felt he belonged by her side. He insisted he couldn't just abandon her regardless of what she became. To him, her current failure was only temporary, and his loyalty was firm. Even if she were broken or disabled, he claimed he would still care for her. This had nothing to do with money or enduring hardship. As long as she didn't divorce him, he wouldn't leave, especially now when she needed him most. Ruyan looked at him as if he were speaking nonsense. She argued that they barely had a real relationship, claiming Ningbing only gave him money to buy things without any actual connection. She couldn't understand why he would suffer for someone he didn't love. Ruyan stared at him as if she were looking at a complete fool. Xiaoyu countered by asking who said Ningbing treated him poorly. When she had money, she gave him a generous allowance every single month. Though she had no time for him, she allowed him to spend freely. While that money might have been a small amount to her, it wasn't easy to earn. He viewed her generosity as a kindness she wasn't obligated to show. Since she had given to him, he felt he owed her his loyalty now that she had fallen. He pointed out that even with the divorce, she was willing to give him most of her remaining money. To him, that spoke volumes. She had fulfilled her duty as a person, and if that wasn't considered being good, he didn't know what was. After all, they lacked a romantic foundation. Given their lack of history, acting with such integrity was more than enough. He then turned the question on Ruyan, asking if she thought she was any better. Ruyan insisted that if he chose her, she would treat him wonderfully. But before she could continue her performance, Xiaoyu cut her off. He reminded her of their university days when he was broke and she looked down on him, thinking he was just trying to use her for her status. During the 2 years they were together, she never spent a single cent on him. Even her gifts were just freebies from other purchases. In contrast, he worked part-time jobs just to fund her lifestyle, only for her to dump him the moment it suited her. "Is that what you call being good?" Ruyan's expression darkened as she accused him of lying, asking if Ningbing had poisoned his mind against her. It was a classic deflection, really. Xiaoyu told her she was overestimating herself. Someone like Ningbing wouldn't even bother mentioning her. She wouldn't even notice Ruyan existed. He noted that only Ruyan was obsessed with staring at Ningbing, desperately trying to find some sense of validation in her presence. He told her that the world is simply a reflection of who you are, and suggested she leave before he said something even more unpleasant. Ruyan's gaze grew even more sinister as she stepped closer, claiming again that Ningbing must have brainwashed him into thinking this way. She pleaded with him, claiming her feelings were real and that Ningbing was only clinging to him now because she had lost all her money. She begged him not to be so foolish, but Xiaoyu told her to stop and stay back. He had heard quite enough of this particular drama. He made it clear that abandoning a spouse the moment they lose their power is beneath any decent human being. He wouldn't leave her now. He told Ruyan to give up on her scheme. If he ever left Ningbing, it would only be when she truly no longer needed him. Ruyan tried to protest, but suddenly, a burst of applause and cheers erupted nearby. A group of onlookers had been listening, and they clearly approved of his integrity. They praised his character, remarking that if more people thought like him, the world wouldn't be plagued by so many broken marriages. The crowd agreed that his wife was lucky to have him. It was only then that Xiaoyu noticed a group of elderly neighbors nearby. These seniors, who had clearly just finished their morning exercise, walked over. Their leader began to look Rian up and down with a critical eye. Rian couldn't help but shake her head as the seniors approached, telling her it wasn't right to interfere with a happy marriage. They pointed out that trying to steal someone's husband was quite shameful. They asked her to imagine how she would feel if she were married. And another woman tried to take her place. Do not do to others what you would not have them do to you, they lectured. They questioned her logic. If a wife should leave just because she lost her money, how could Rian guarantee that she herself would never face a day of poverty? It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the group of elders began a relentless critique. They criticized Rian so fiercely she didn't even have a chance to argue. In their eyes, she had become a morally bankrupt woman. Xiaoyu quickly stepped aside to give the elders more room, hiding behind the crowd while struggling to suppress his laughter. He told them she certainly needed a good lesson and thanked them, explaining he had to head home to cook dinner. The elders waved him off, telling him they would handle things from here. Meanwhile, watching this entire scene from a distance, Ningbing and Qinghan sat in their car, completely still. They watched as Rian was finally allowed to leave after admitting her mistakes. Qinghan spoke up in disbelief, asking if that was really the same Xiaoyu they knew. He seemed like a completely different person. Ningbing confirmed it was him. Qinghan remarked that he seemed wonderful, though they once thought he just wasted money. Now that Ningbing was technically bankrupt, he refused to leave her side, even if it meant enduring a much harder life. And the most striking part was that he stayed out of moral duty rather than just romance. His integrity was exactly as the elders described. At that moment, Ningbing realized her own perception of him had been quite flawed. After dropping off Qinghan, she headed straight home. When she opened the door, she found Xiaoyu sitting on the rug in front of the sofa, typing away furiously on his laptop. The apartment was filled with the delicious aroma of cooking meat. As she entered, she placed some fruit on the coffee table and walked over. She was surprised to see that he was actually writing a story. He explained that while he'd forgotten his major, he still remembered his old hobbies. Since he had always enjoyed reading novels and understood the craft well enough, he decided he would try his hand at writing. He was going to attempt writing a web novel, hoping to turn a new page in his own story as well. Xiaoyu smiled, telling her that as long as she was happy, that was all that mattered. He knew this young lady likely had no interest in his simple hobbies. To avoid any awkwardness, he quickly changed the subject, mentioning the ribs were stewing and would be ready in an hour. Ningbing simply nodded. She went to freshen up and change, retreating into her room for the next hour. When the time finally came, Xiaoyu knocked to call her for dinner. We see the table set with 2 bowls of rice and a vibrant spread of colorful dishes. He had even added garnishes to make it look professional. It was clear he had put his heart into the cooking. He admitted it was his first time making sweet and sour ribs, inviting her to try them. While his standards weren't impossibly high, they certainly weren't low either. He kept a clean home and cooked whenever he could, a very disciplined life. His life skills were perfectly fine, so his modesty was really just a polite gesture. To be honest, his cooking was better than he let on. He had always been the designated chef at friend gatherings, earning plenty of praise. Ningbing took a bite of the ribs and considered the flavor. She nodded, admitting they were quite delicious. Relieved, Xiaoyu encouraged her to eat more, noting how chaotic and exhausting her last few days had been. He told her she hadn't eaten or rested well and deserved a break. He then poured a glass of freshly brewed lemon tea and pushed it toward her. He explained he'd added a bit of honey for vitamin C, urging her to drink what she could despite the sourness. Ningbing watched him with a searching gaze. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man before her was a complete stranger. He didn't match the reports she'd read or the person she'd known for 2 years. Then again, she realized she had never truly paid him much attention. She couldn't be sure her old information was complete, so she suppressed her doubts. She thanked him for his hard work, but he brushed it off. He insisted that staying home was easy compared to the storms she was facing outside. He smiled, telling her she was the one who was truly exhausted and needed the nourishment. He understood her situation better than she realized. He knew that in the past, Ningbing was someone others could only dream of reaching. While her grandfather was alive, no one dared challenge the Bai family. Ningbing had been the golden child, the one every other parent used as a benchmark to criticize their own children. But times had changed. With the old man gone, the distant relatives were only interested in carving up what was left. They weren't looking to help. They wanted her to fail. In fact, they seemed to enjoy kicking her while she was down. There is a certain cruel satisfaction, it seems, in trampling someone you once had to look up to. Back when Xiaoyu was just a reader of this story, he never understood why Ningbing remained so stubborn and refused to give up. Xiaoyu wondered why she didn't just ask her close friends for help, as their support could have easily saved her from ruin. But their relationship wasn't exactly close enough for him to ask. He felt it wasn't his place to pry, assuming that as a former young lady of high status, Ningbing surely had her own reasons. After all, she knew her world better than he did. He wasn't entirely sure how Ningbing felt about the meal, but he personally finished with a sense of deep satisfaction. He guessed she didn't hate his cooking, at the very least. She had eaten 2 whole bowls, which was a good sign. He told her he'd leave the dishes in the kitchen for now and wash them after his nap, so she wouldn't have to worry about them. After placing the dishes in the sink, he washed some fruit and set it on the coffee table. Then, he settled back into his spot to continue typing away at his familiar stories. His progress was naturally quite fast, especially since he had spent years perfecting his typing speed. By the end of the morning, he had already finished a 2,000-word outline. At this rate, he estimated he could finish 20,000 words by tomorrow and submit the manuscript. It was a productive start, to say the least. He and Ningbing were going through a difficult time and desperately needed the money. Since he didn't understand business, his only way to help was to earn more and ease her burden. Meanwhile, Ningbing returned to her room and closed the door, leaving him to wonder what she was doing inside. She seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. By 1:30, he forced himself to shut down the computer and head off for a nap. The living room fell silent as he retreated to his own bedroom. Inside her room, Ningbing hesitated before replying to Gu Qinghan on her phone. She decided to wait and see how things developed before investigating Xiaoyu any further. She told herself she might be overthinking things and should just wait. Less than an hour later, the alarm went off, and Xiaoyu dragged himself out of bed. Feeling a bit groggy, he stumbled toward the bathroom, only to find the door was closed. He grumbled to himself about his own forgetfulness as he reached for the handle. He pulled the door open with a quick tug and was about to step inside when he suddenly found himself face-to-face with Ningbing. He immediately apologized for the intrusion. He explained that he was still half asleep and hadn't realized she was there. He was quite dazed, to be honest. Ningbing was just stepping out of the bathroom, and though they were a few meters apart, the sudden encounter was enough to make the air feel a bit heavy with awkwardness. She told him it was fine and not to feel embarrassed. In such a small house, they were bound to run into each other, and they would simply have to get used to it. He nodded quickly, agreeing that they'd get used to it in time. He then asked if she was going out, but she replied that her business for the day was already finished. Since she would be staying home for the next few days, she suddenly asked if there was anything he needed help with. This unexpected offer left him feeling a bit surprised. Xiaoyu felt a bit uneasy and asked if something was wrong. Ningbing replied that while she grew up in the Bai family, she wasn't lacking in basic life skills. She reminded him that since they were living together in this small home, he could tell her anything directly. She wasn't just someone who only knew how to make money. Xiaoyu nodded, finding Ningbing's serious expression surprisingly cute. He realized that regardless of her business success or failure, her looks were truly beyond reproach. As the most beautiful woman ever described by his own author's pen, she remained stunning even when her face was completely devoid of emotion. He felt quite impressed with his own self-control, managed to stay calm while facing such a woman. Ningbing then gave him a deeply meaningful look. After that look, she returned to her room. It was then that Xiaoyu realized he had forgotten something important, so he hurried over to her door. He asked what she wanted for dinner, and she simply replied that she wasn't picky. It seemed the young lady was easier to please than he had imagined. He wandered back to the coffee table to continue his writing. Once he finished a chapter, he suddenly remembered the items he had listed on the secondhand website. He quickly checked the app and was shocked to see that 12 watches and 2 suits had already been sold. To be honest, he didn't fully grasp the value of luxury goods. When he listed them, he had researched the prices online and set them at a 20% discount. Many of these items hadn't even been unpacked yet. He hadn't dared to set the prices too high, fearing Ningbing might need the money urgently. He had worried they wouldn't sell, but they were moving quite fast. After recording the shipping addresses and saving his writing file, he hurried into the room to gather the specific watches and clothes. Since there were so many items to send, he decided to call for a courier pickup. Half an hour later, everything was packed and ready to go. The courier arrived just as Ningbing, likely hearing the commotion, opened her door and stepped out into the living room. She asked what he was doing. He explained that there were too many clothes and watches taking up space, especially since he wasn't going out much lately. He told her he had sorted some out to sell and needed to get them to the buyers quickly. Ningbing frowned, telling him they hadn't reached that point yet. She felt he didn't need to sell his things, but he insisted they were just taking up space and were no longer the latest models anyway. He claimed he wouldn't use them and preferred to trade them for cash, so he could buy new things he liked later on. A reasonable excuse, at least. He felt this explanation was respectful enough to save her pride. However, something he said must have touched her in a way he didn't expect. Ningbing reached out and gave his hand a brief, firm squeeze before letting go. She didn't stop him further, simply saying, "All right," before turning away. Buy new ones. He wouldn't dare. A single watch costing tens of thousands could cover his living expenses for half a year. Buying a few more would leave him penniless, but he kept that complaint to himself. After all, a highborn lady like Ningbing had her pride to maintain. He offered a bright smile, telling her he'd just wait for her to buy him new ones later. Ningbing seemed momentarily dazed by this familiar, yet suddenly strange smile. She looked down at the packed boxes on the floor, then leaned over to help the courier place them into a large transport bag. Only after the courier had departed with the items did Ningbing finally ask how many more things he intended to sell. He explained his plan. Out of over 100 watches and 80 suits, many of which were still sealed, he intended to sell the vast majority. He figured keeping 10 watches and about 30 suits would be plenty, deciding to liquidate the rest for the sake of their budget. He expected her to stop him, but to his surprise, Ningbing simply nodded. She said nothing more and picked up an apple to peel. As she sat on the sofa, he couldn't quite read her thoughts. He wondered if his actions had inadvertently bruised her ego. Still, survival was more important than overthinking. Even if she minded, he felt he had no other choice in their current situation. That morning, he had checked the local real estate prices and saw they were rising. He wasn't sure what Ningbing's long-term plans were. He didn't know if she would truly make a comeback, but he was determined to find a way to buy a house of their own first. Selling the luxury items would cover a down payment. He planned to give the rest to Ningbing and handle the mortgage payments himself. That way, even if the young lady never regained her fortune, they would at least have a roof over their heads. It was a solid plan, really. He sat by the coffee table staring at his computer screen, lost in thought, when a perfectly peeled apple suddenly appeared before him. The fresh scent of the fruit hit him, and he noticed the skin had been removed with impressive precision. He couldn't help but swallow hard. He realized Ningbing was holding the apple out to him. When he asked if it was for him, she nudged it closer, her expression softening. She told him he was suffering because of her, which left him feeling quite overwhelmed. In the original story, Ningbing was never this patient with men. The fact that she was peeling fruit for him, and doing it so beautifully, was truly astonishing. He quickly took the apple from her. He told her it was no trouble, noting that the money used to buy it was hers anyway. He was just grateful she hadn't judged his past spending habits. To his surprise, Ningbing actually smiled. Usually, her face was a mask of cool indifference, not exactly freezing, but certainly not approachable. This sudden warmth left him completely dazed, wondering how such a stunning woman could exist. She promised that one day, she would buy him even more watches. He nodded subconsciously, feeling a bit shy as he regained his senses. He told her he truly believed she would make a grand comeback. He encouraged her not to rush, saying he'd wait for those watches and that she could do it. With a lingering smile, Ningbing stood up to head to her room. Out of his sight, a glimmer of genuine interest flashed in her eyes. Meanwhile, he spent the afternoon grinding away at his manuscript, finally finishing 10,000 words. After a simple dinner together, they returned to their own tasks. He stayed up until midnight, successfully completing a total of 20,000 words. The next morning, after breakfast, Ningbing headed out. He immediately began tinkering with his submissions while checking the secondhand sales pages. 8 more watches and a suit had sold. It felt as though a mountain of cash was steadily crawling its way into his wallet, which put him in a fantastic mood. Just as he finished organizing his drafts and sent them off, a knock sounded at the door. He stood up, wondering who could be visiting at this hour. A man's voice drifted from the other side, identifying himself as Lu Jingyan. He began to open the door while trying to place the name. He searched his memory for a long time, but found nothing on this person. Upon opening the door, he found a single man standing there. The visitor had a certain rugged, handsome charm about him. The moment he saw our protagonist, he began sizing him up with a rather judgmental gaze. Not knowing who this fellow was, he instinctively blocked the entrance and asked who he was looking for. The man confirmed he was looking for Gu Xiaoyu. The stranger leaned in, squeezing his way into the house while asking if Sister Ningbing was around. Since he was already inside, there wasn't much point in pushing him out. He closed the door and politely set a cup of tea before the guest, explaining that she had gone out early. He then asked what business the man had with him. The man replied that he certainly had business. He remarked that while Xiaoyu wasn't bad-looking, he lacked both family background and any real talent. He claimed it was a tragedy for Sister Ningbing to be married to him. He knew the marriage only happened because Ningbing's grandfather wanted to repay a debt. He pointed out that despite being married for years, Xiaoyu had never helped her career. Instead, he spent his days doing nothing but shopping and playing. The man asked if he didn't feel ashamed of himself. Xiaoyu took a breath and calmly asked what exactly his relationship was with Ningbing. The man declared they were childhood sweethearts and that she had always been exceptionally kind to him. In his mind, if it weren't for this marriage, things would be different. He claimed that if things had been different, they would have been together long ago. Xiaoyu, however, noted he had never even heard of this man. Lu Jingyan scoffed, asking if he really expected Ningbing to mention their childhood bond to him. And honestly, it made sense that she hadn't. They weren't close, and she wasn't the type to gossip. Xiaoyu simply nodded and asked what the actual purpose of this visit was. The man explained that Ningbing was currently in desperate need of help, and his father had finally agreed to a specific condition. If they married, his father would fund her comeback. Therefore, he concluded, Xiaoyu should do the honorable thing and divorce her. Xiaoyu countered that if Ningbing wanted a divorce, she could tell him herself. He wasn't the type to cling, unless, of course, this was just the visitor's idea. Lu Jingyan insisted that Ningbing was too dignified to do something so tasteless. She was embarrassed to bring it up, so the initiative had to be Xiaoyu's. He reminded Xiaoyu that he had spent her money for years without contributing anything, yet she had never once made life difficult for him. Now that she was in trouble and he couldn't help, the least he could do was stop being a burden. By initiating the divorce himself, she could simply follow along, and everyone would save face. Xiaoyu asked again if this was Ningbing's wish, but the man admitted it was his own. He argued that Xiaoyu still didn't understand. Ningbing wouldn't ask, so they had to take the lead to help her. First, the divorce had to happen. Only then could he marry her and secure his father's financial backing. Xiaoyu listened calmly, weighing the logic of this rather bold proposal. He told the man that if it were Ningbing's wish, he'd leave without issue. But since it wasn't, he had a few questions of his own. He asked if they had ever actually been a couple before the marriage, or if she even loved him. Lu Jingyan froze mid-sip, his confidence wavering. He stammered that it didn't matter, claiming she just wasn't good at expressing herself. Besides, he added, she certainly didn't love Xiaoyu either. Xiaoyu admitted he might not know Ningbing perfectly yet, but he was certain of one thing. She would never accept help with such strings attached, especially not when that help was traded for a marriage. The visitor thought he was doing her a favor by convincing his father to intervene. But he hadn't considered her reputation. If she rose to the top through his father's influence, she would forever be labeled as someone who bought her success. She would never escape the shadow of a political marriage. Xiaoyu knew from his own understanding that the woman he lived with wasn't a parasite. She wasn't someone who would take the easy way out. In fact, it was her refusal to bow down that had caused her so much trouble to begin with. How could a person like that ever accept using her own marriage as a bargaining chip for a comeback? At least, not in the short term. To be honest, Xiaoyu didn't mind the idea of divorcing Ningbing, but he refused to be manipulated into it by someone else's instigation. Whatever Ningbing wanted was her own business, and he would respect her choice. But Lu Jingyan reacted as if his tail had been stepped on. He exploded, accusing Xiaoyu of just wanting to drag her down and refusing the divorce out of pure selfishness. He shouted that Ningbing had already done more than enough for him, and now that she finally had a chance to rise again, Xiaoyu was killing it. He called Xiaoyu's behavior disgusting. Xiaoyu, however, remained calm, noting he had been polite enough despite the man's sudden intrusion. He pointed out that Lu Jingyan was speaking out of turn, acting like someone trying to destroy a family. After all, his marriage with Ningbing wasn't something an outsider had any right to interfere with. Even if the man's intentions were good, we see that his methods were lacking. If he wanted to help her, he should talk to her directly. Xiaoyu couldn't make her decisions for her, nor would he. He wasn't the type to cling desperately to a marriage. If one thinks about it for a moment, the truth becomes quite clear. If she truly loved this man, why hadn't they married before Grandpa found Xiaoyu? If the feelings weren't there then, why weren't they even a couple? Lu Jingyan claimed she wasn't the type to betray her heart, yet here he was, acting on her behalf in a way that felt like a betrayal of her character. He hadn't considered the actual problems at hand. Lu Jingyan snapped, asking how a pretty boy who only knew how to spend money had any right to lecture him. Xiaoyu replied that he had every right because he was still her legal husband, and he would speak up against anyone trying to interfere. He admitted that in the past, he had only spent money and hadn't helped much, but Ningbing had always allowed it. If she didn't mind, why was this visitor so worried? If he wanted to marry her, he should reach an agreement with her first. If they reached an understanding, Xiaoyu would divorce her without a second thought. But he wouldn't agree to this demand. Lu Jingyan was furious. He slammed his cup onto the table, calling Xiaoyu shameless. Xiaoyu, no longer angry, simply toyed with his own cup. He wondered where a man trying to break up a marriage found the courage to call someone else shameless. Clearly, they had nothing more to say. So, in the end, you simply refused to get a divorce, Lu Jingyan snapped. Xiaoyu merely shrugged, letting the man believe whatever he wanted. Realizing he wouldn't achieve his goal today, Lu Jingyan stood up and stormed toward the exit. Before leaving, however, he couldn't resist one last parting shot. Just you wait, he threatened. Sister Bai will dump you sooner or later. As the door slammed shut, Xiaoyu let out a long, weary sigh. It was one thing for the heroine to be popular, but even the antagonists were obsessed with her. To be honest, if his conscience didn't stop him, he'd love to divorce her. But that was just a passing thought. He couldn't bring himself to simply take over someone else's body and life without taking responsibility for the consequences. Even if he wasn't the one who spent all that money, the debt was technically in his name now. Pushing those thoughts aside, he opened a web page to check some addresses. He went to his room to gather the watches he had sold, carefully packing them before calling a courier. Efficiency, we see, was becoming his new habit. He needed to ship today's sales as early as possible. By his calculations, the items he had sold so far were worth nearly 2 million. Once the buyers received their goods, a massive sum of money would hit his bank account. A few more sales, and he could finally afford a down payment. The dream of becoming a homeowner filled him with a sudden burst of motivation. It was a modest goal, perhaps, but a very real one. Deciding to take a break from writing, he began browsing local real estate listings. He felt that his first house deserved a very careful selection. Time slipped away as he browsed, and before he knew it, noon was approaching. He didn't even stop to close the browser before rushing to the kitchen. Ningbing had mentioned this morning that she would be back for lunch. He had been so lost in his daydreams of a better life that he'd completely lost track of time. He planned to make wontons for lunch. He had prepared the filling early that morning, and the wrappers had been purchased the day before. His movements were remarkably practiced, falling into a rhythmic grace. Every few seconds, another perfectly shaped wonton appeared as if by magic. He had already finished over 20 when Ningbing returned. He was so focused on his work that he didn't even look up, simply calling out, "You're back." Standing in the doorway, Ningbing could see his hands moving with lightning speed, though she couldn't quite tell what he was making yet. "What are you doing?" she asked instinctively. "Making wontons," he replied. "We're having them for lunch, and I'll fry some flatbreads to go with them." He spoke with such natural ease that one might forget these weren't skills a typical spoiled husband would possess. It was a bit suspicious, really. Doubt began to flicker in Ningbing's mind once again. But in the next moment, seeing him sitting there so peacefully, she found herself hesitating. Watching Xiaoyu's practiced movements as he folded the wontons, she felt her suspicions fading. After all, it had been a very long time since she had eaten anything like this. The words escaped Ningbing's lips almost before she could stop them. Feeling a bit strange, she quickly fell silent and retreated into the bathroom to wash her hands. Xiaoyu, however, didn't notice her odd behavior at all. He simply loved wontons himself and assumed that with Ningbing's busy schedule, she just hadn't had the time for snacks. He figured that in the high-stakes world of her business, simple comfort food was likely the last thing on her mind. It was perfectly normal to go a long time without it. In that case, you should eat a bit more, he suggested warmly. I'll boil an extra portion now, and I can freeze the rest of the batch for later. He explained that they'd be perfect for those days when neither of them felt like cooking. Ningbing, having finished washing her hands, simply agreed to the extra serving. It truly had been years since she'd indulged in street-style snacks. 3 or 4 years, to be precise. If Xiaoyu hadn't brought it up, she might never have noticed. She hadn't realized just how long it had been since she'd actually allowed herself to relax. Xiaoyu, meanwhile, kept his hands moving as he confirmed the plan. As he worked, he felt a quiet sense of hope. To him, life was beginning to feel full of these small, meaningful moments of happiness. He believed that a good life is something one builds day by day. Being given a second chance at existence was a stroke of luck he didn't intend to waste. He felt that every gift life offered should be cherished, even something as simple as sitting down to a bowl of wontons. About an hour later, lunch was ready. 2 steaming bowls of wontons were placed on the table, and he called Ningbing over. He sat down first, nodding for her to join him at the table. With an expectant smile, he urged her to try them. He was quite proud of his handiwork, though he wasn't entirely sure how much of an appetite she had. Knowing that wontons alone might not be enough to fill her up, he had also prepared some flatbread wraps. He paused, wondering if she even liked such things. Ningbing found his concerns slightly amusing, though she kept her expression neutral. Of course I eat them, she replied. I'm a normal person, after all. She sat down and took a bite, offering a genuine compliment on the flavor. Xiaoyu beamed, noting that he always knew his wontons were a cut above the rest. He admitted that his skill mostly came from his own love for the dish. Since the meal was a success, the atmosphere between them felt unusually light. However, when he stood up to do the dishes, she stopped him. She mentioned that she would simply buy a dishwasher, but Xiaoyu didn't see the need. He argued that washing a few bowls wasn't worth the extra expense. Ningbing, however, dismissed his concerns about money with a casual wave of her hand. Xiaoyu's expression immediately turned conflicted. It seemed the young lady hadn't quite adjusted her mindset to their current financial reality yet. We see Xiaoyu wrestling with a difficult truth. They are no longer the wealthy people they once were. He considers reminding the young lady of their new reality, but then he looks at her. Seeing the slight frown on Ningbing's face, the lecture he intended to give vanishes instantly. Instead, he simply tells her that he will go out and buy a dishwasher himself later on. He adds that he is quite picky and might take a long time to choose one, sighing inwardly at how easily her beauty disarms his practical side. To be honest, he simply doesn't have the heart to say anything that might hurt her pride. He figures that if he claims to be overly fastidious, she won't question why the purchase takes so long. Ningbing, observing his conflicted expression, suddenly realizes exactly what her husband is worried about. It is a moment of quiet, unexpected clarity for her. A strange sensation washes over her in that moment. Although her grandfather had made her experience hardship in her youth, those days felt like a lifetime ago. Since completing her training at 15, she had never truly known the sting of poverty again. This situation, however, is slightly different and quite ironic. It isn't that she is actually penniless, but rather that her husband believes she is. Yet, even with that assumption, he refuses to embarrass her by mentioning their lack of funds. It is a peculiar feeling that she can't quite put into words. Without another word, she simply tells him she has work to do and retreats to her room. Left alone to finish the dishes, Xiaoyu begins to hum a little tune. To him, life is actually going quite well. He has a roof over his head and food on the table. With the money from the watch and clothes, he knows he will soon have a place of his own. He is certain that, from here on out, things will only continue to improve. He has no doubt that a woman of Ningbing's talent will eventually stage a comeback. When that day comes, he thinks with a small smile, she might even share some of the profits. But even if she never returns to her former glory, he tells himself it doesn't matter. He is perfectly capable of supporting a household on his own now. For now, having her around as a sort of friend provides a sense of security. He knows she won't stay idle forever, as she isn't the type to settle for a mundane life. He decides that if she ever wants a divorce to pursue a different path, he will grant it. To him, simply wishing each other well would be a perfectly fine conclusion. After finishing the chores, he heads toward the sofa for a nap, but Ningbing suddenly opens her door. She asks if Lu Jinyan caused him any trouble earlier that day. He explains that it wasn't exactly trouble, though she did try to pressure him into divorcing Ningbing. Naturally, he tells her that he refused the demand. He makes it clear that there is nothing between him and Jinyan, and he certainly wouldn't end his marriage because of her. It was a simple matter of principle. Ningbing tells him he did the right thing, adding that they can discuss other matters later. For now, she insists she doesn't need any outside help with her current situation. She notes that these are problems even Jinyan's father couldn't solve, and Xiaoyu simply nods. He knows that some battles are meant to be fought alone. Thinking that was the end of it, Xiaoyu stands up to head to his room for a nap, but Ningbing suddenly speaks, watching him with a searching gaze. She asks if he has anything else to do, wondering when exactly he developed the habit of taking midday naps. His body stiffens, feeling a bit guilty as he explains. He tells her he simply realized his old habits were poor and his health was lacking, so he is forcing himself to adjust his routine. He suggests that she might want to try a nap herself, as it would likely give her more energy for the afternoon. Ningbing gets up and returns to her room, leaving Xiaoyu standing there feeling uneasy, wondering if he said something wrong. He tells himself that after a major crisis like a family bankruptcy, anyone is allowed to change their ways. Meanwhile, inside her room, Ningbing sits at her desk. She sits expressionless, lost in thought. After a moment, she still seems undecided about something, but she eventually picks up her phone. She makes a call, instructing someone to buy a dishwasher and have it delivered to her place, noting that some matters still require observation. Until then, she decides to let things proceed as they are. After hanging up, Ningbing sets her phone down on the table. Her eyes drift toward the bed, and Xiaoyu's words about napping echo in her mind. She wonders if a midday rest is truly as beneficial as he claimed. Before she even realizes it, she finds herself lying down on the bed. As her body relaxes, she admits to herself that it does feel quite nice. She reflects on how busy she has been over the years. It has been a very long time since she allowed herself to sleep with such peace of mind. Time slips away, and soon it is 2:30 in the afternoon. Xiaoyu emerges from his room, stretching his arms wide as he heads for the bathroom. After washing his face, he steps out only to see Ningbing coming out of her room, her eyes still clouded with the haze of sleep. He is struck by how stunning she looks even when she's just woken up. It seems almost unfair that someone so beautiful is cast as a villain. He muses that the author must have put a lot of effort into creating her, only to give her such a tragic ending in the original story. It's a pity, he thinks, and without realizing it, a look of genuine pity and tenderness flickers across his face. When Ningbing catches that look, it seems to startle her, as if she's been burned. She immediately averts her gaze. She asks if he needs the bathroom, and he quickly steps aside, stammering that he's already finished and she should go right ahead. A moment later, he sits back down at his computer to begin writing. As soon as he opens his chat app, he sees a new friend request waiting for him. The friend request is from an editor at the literature website. Just then, Ningbing hears the commotion and steps out of the bathroom, drying her hands as she asks what is happening. He excitedly tells her that his novel passed the first review, and once it clears the second and third, it will finally start turning into actual money. She offers a polite, "Is that so?" She offers her congratulations, and after a quick thanks, Xiaoyu stops paying attention to Ningbing, completely immersing himself in the world of his novel as he looks back down. As he begins typing away, Ningbing watches him work for a moment before returning to the bathroom. Later that afternoon, Xiaoyu contacts a courier to pick up some packages. The courier is a young woman who asks if he's running an online store, noting that the watches he's shipping look quite impressive. She even asks if he could sell her one at a discount, as she's looking for a gift for her boyfriend. To be honest, it was a bold request for a first meeting. Xiaoyu is taken aback and waves his hands, explaining that he doesn't run a shop. He's simply helping a friend ship these items. He mentions that the watches are quite expensive, likely costing tens of thousands, so he can't make any decisions, though he offers to ask his friend if she's truly interested. The courier is shocked to hear they are luxury goods. Xiaoyu admits he doesn't know much about them himself, but he knows they certainly aren't cheap. As they are talking, the elevator doors suddenly open and Ningbing steps out. It seems she has heard every word of their conversation. She asks what's going on, and Xiaoyu explains that the courier wanted to buy a watch, but since they aren't his, he was just offering to check with his friend for a discount. The courier quickly backtracks, saying that if they are luxury items, she'll pass, as an ordinary person like her has no business wearing something so expensive. She asks if these are all the packages for today, noting that if so, she'll pack them up and head out to get them processed immediately. Xiaoyu confirms that's everything and thanks her for the help. As the courier takes the parcels and enters the elevator, we see him realize he's been blocking the doorway. He quickly steps aside to let Ningbing in, surprised that she returned so early. She simply remarks that there wasn't much to handle today before asking why he lied about the watches. He explains that claiming they belong to someone else is safer. After all, they don't know the security situation here, and flaunting wealth could lead to unnecessary danger. Imagine the risk if someone realized just how much money was sitting in this apartment. It's better to stay under the radar, especially with people who visit frequently. He points out that since this courier comes by often, she's a familiar face. If he admitted the watches were his, but didn't give her a massive discount, she might grow resentful. He worries that a disgruntled worker might tamper with his goods. While he could follow formal procedures to complain later, it would be a massive headache he'd rather avoid. Ultimately, he knows that you can know a person's face without knowing their heart. In his mind, being cautious is simply the most practical path forward. Ningbing agrees that there's no need to overthink things, but then she mentions that in a few days, there is a cocktail party they need to attend together. She tells him to prepare early, but Xiaoyu hesitates, admitting he's rarely attended such events and worries he might cause her some trouble. She assures him that at this stage, no one can truly cause her trouble anymore, and even if they did, she wouldn't care in the slightest. Ningbing calmly pours herself a glass of water, while Xiaoyu admits her confidence makes him feel a bit out of his element, though he agrees to go. He promises to prepare well. Over the next 2 days, Ningbing continues her routine of leaving early and returning late, though she is always home for meals. Xiaoyu falls into the habit of preparing 2 portions for breakfast and dinner, spending the rest of his time writing his novel and selling his goods. He also spends his spare moments researching how to behave at a high-end party. When Ningbing walks in today, she notices things are a bit different. Instead of being curled up on the sofa as usual, Xiaoyu looks toward her with an intense, almost eerie expression the moment he hears the door. She looks at the mountain of clothes piled on the sofa and asks what's happening. He quickly asks for her help, admitting it's been a long time since he's socialized. He confesses he has no idea what style is appropriate now, showing her a few formal outfits he picked out and asking which one looks best. She notes that he used to be quite insistent on picking his own clothes. He explains that back then, the sudden change in his environment made him sensitive. In the past, he felt he had to choose his own clothes just to maintain a shred of his dignity. But now, he has finally come to a realization. He understands that a person is who they are. There's no point in being so sensitive that others look down on you. It's better to just admit when you're lost. Ningbing observes that he seems to have figured things out. He urges her to take a look, as he truly can't make up his mind on which suit is right. After looking them over, Ningbing casually points to a classic black suit, suggesting it's the most suitable choice because it isn't too flashy. He agrees to the choice and begins putting the other clothes away. When the day of the banquet arrives, Ningbing personally drives them to the venue. Xiaoyu intentionally sits in the back seat. Ningbing catches his eye in the rearview mirror and asks if he'll be cold dressed so lightly. He tells her he'll be fine since the sleeves are long. Then, she notes that his attitude toward her lately seems a bit strange. He's surprised, asking why it would be. After all, they have no grievances, and she has been so good to him that he can't thank her enough. He explains that they didn't interact much before, and seeing each other every single day now is a bit of an adjustment, but he's sure he'll get used to it. Ningbing watches him through the rearview mirror as he rubs the back of his head. His forced smile fades, leaving him looking rather lost. Suddenly, the desire for conversation vanishes, and they fall into silence. Soon, they arrive at the city's largest hotel, where our duo has just stepped out. At the entrance, their path is blocked, intentionally or not, by a slightly stout man with hair that practically glistens with oil. A flashily dressed woman clings to his arm, while a look of clear malice settles on his face as he mentions a land deal on the east side of the city. He asks if Mr. Li shouldn't be paying more attention to the Guangyuan group's interests. Mr. Li freezes, his expression twisting for a moment. He quickly forces a smile back onto his face, but Ningbing has already seen enough. She ignores him completely, leading Xiaoyu around the man and deeper into the venue. As they walk through the gala, we see several familiar faces. These were Xiaoyu's old fair-weather friends, mostly sons or live-in husbands of wealthy families who, to be honest, were never held in high regard. Some of them raise their glasses, tempted to approach him, but after seeing Ningbing by his side, they wisely choose to shrink back into the crowd. A few exchange hushed, mocking words, questioning why anyone would go over there just to seek trouble. They decide it's better to stay away. After all, they were never truly close, just acquaintances for the sake of appearances. Now that the tides have turned, being friends seems like a bad idea. They haven't walked far when 2 young men, accompanied by women on their arms, approach them with a hurried pace. The older of the two, a man around 30, wears a thin, fake smile as he remarks on how long it's been since he last saw Miss Ningbing. He gestures towards Xiaoyu, feigning a lapse in memory, and wonders aloud if this is indeed Miss Ningbing's husband. He notes how rare it is to see them out together, mockingly asking if life has been difficult or if they've recently run short on funds. He mentions the rumors of their strained relationship, claiming that seeing them now proves the gossip was wrong, which, naturally, is a lie. He adds that he thought Mr. Tang's health was so poor he couldn't even get out of bed, but it seems he can still stand after all. He observes that while smart people learn to avoid the places where they once fell, the less intelligent won't stop until they've ruined themselves in the same spot. He asks Mr. Tang for his opinion. Xiaoyu simply agrees, noting that some pits from the past have now become treasures waiting on the ground. He suggests that when a treasure appears, everyone naturally wants to claim it, and he's certain Miss Ningbing understands his meaning perfectly. The man continues, mentioning he heard Miss Ningbing has run into some business trouble lately, and since they are old acquaintances, he feels he should speak up. He offers a bit of kind advice, suggesting that sometimes wealth isn't just about money. It can also be about the people one keeps around. Xiaoyu instinctively clenches his fists and steps in front of Ningbing to shield her. Just then, a woman's voice rings out from nearby, calling for her sister. The two men's expressions shift instantly as they take a step back. The newcomer, Xiaorong, explains she's just here to look around. She demands to know what they think they're doing, asking since when they were important enough to just strike up a conversation with her sister. She wonders aloud if the Tang and Shi families have lost all their standards. She asks why they're still standing there. Perhaps they're waiting for an invitation? She warns them that she doesn't have a temper as gentle as her sisters. Taking the hint, the two men nod quickly and make a hasty exit. Their female companions try to look back at Xiaoyu out of curiosity, but they are harshly scolded. Xiaorong then turns to her sister with a sigh. She complains that if Ningbing was coming, she shouldn't have brought him, or at least, she should have given Xiaorong a heads up first. She remarks that those two idiots actually dared to show off in front of her, noting that Ningbing is simply far too patient with such people. Ningbing dismisses it, calling them nothing more than colorful clowns. She then asks why Xiaorong is here, as she usually avoids these events. Xiaorong admits she was worried Ningbing might run into some blind fools. She even had her manager cancel her other appointments just to be here. She's glad she showed up. Otherwise, who knows what those two unlucky losers would have said next. To be honest, she's probably right. Xiaorong turns her gaze towards Xiaoyu, looking him up and down with a critical eye. She tells him that given her sister's current situation, there is no more money for him to squeeze out of her. She suggests he stop pretending and just leave while he still can. Xiaoyu offers a somewhat awkward smile, but says nothing. Ningbing tells her sister to stop talking nonsense, reminding her they aren't divorced yet. They decide to go sit down elsewhere, and Xiaorong insists on joining them. With her sitting there, the other guests finally stop approaching. Anyone with even a bit of status knows Xiaorong is someone you don't want to provoke. Xiaoyu expected more awkwardness, but the mood has shifted. After sitting for a short while, Ningbing decides it's time to leave. Xiaorong tries to invite her sister along for something else, but she is turned down. And so, the two of them head back together. As they sit in the car, Xiaoyu watches Ningbing as she takes the wheel. Ningbing hesitates for a full 3 minutes before finally gathering the courage to ask if he achieved what he came for at the party. He tells her that he has, explaining that after selling those watches and clothes, he's managed to save up a small sum of money. Since their assets are cleared and they aren't in debt, he suggests it might be time to look into buying a small apartment. They could make a down payment, and he can use his writing fees for the rest, keeping 6 months of living expenses for emergencies. The rest could go toward her business, but Ningbing simply watches him through the rearview mirror, telling him there's no rush. He insists that they should hurry, as housing prices change daily and renting isn't a long-term solution. To be honest, he has a point. He even suggests putting the house in her name if it makes her feel more secure, as long as they have a place to call their own. She quietly agrees to consider it. Later that night, we see him return to his room to continue his writing work. Meanwhile, Ningbing receives a phone call from someone who has finished investigating the information she requested. The caller has sent an encrypted file to her email, assuring her that the details haven't been leaked to anyone else. As her laptop screen glows with the open email, she lets out a soft sigh, her fingers idly tapping against the desk. Her brow furrows in thought for a long moment before she finally picks up her phone to make a call of her own. She asks a certain Master Wang if it's possible for a person to suddenly seem like an entirely different individual. She clarifies that she doesn't mean a split personality, but a total shift in habits and values, as if they were someone else entirely. After hanging up a few minutes later, Ningbing leans back in her chair, allowing her body to finally relax. A faint, expressionless smile touches her lips as she ponders the idea of a soul returning. The next morning, breakfast is a quiet affair. After finishing her meal with deliberate slowness, she looks up and asks him what kind of stories he usually writes. Xiaoyu pauses mid-bite, explaining that he writes all sorts of things and doesn't like to limit himself to just one genre. He admits his favorites are stories about transmigration and creative brainhole concepts. She then asks if such things could truly exist. He tells her he believes they do, noting that in a world this strange, no one can say for certain what is real. He muses that while we feel we live in a very real world, it might just be a world constructed by someone else's pen. Who truly knows? What is the world really like anyway? If we can't even confirm that, how can we say that transmigration into a written world doesn't exist? Of course, in someone else's story, we might just be an anonymous passerby, or perhaps even a minor background character. Ningbing then asks him what his past life might have been like if he had transmigrated. He thinks he must have been a happy person. He imagines a life with loving parents as an only child, free to do as he pleased. His parents might have passed away suddenly, but he studied what he loved. He wouldn't have lacked food, drink, or money, and life would have been decent enough. If he finally transmigrated, it would have been a specific way. He suggests he would have died saving someone else, perhaps stabbed by a thug, the very unlucky kind of death. That is a bit grim, to be honest. Since that kind of death is indeed unlucky, he notes that one should think twice before acting, even when motivated by a kind heart. She agrees that this is very important. After that, the two don't mention the topic again, and the morning proceeds as usual. Once Ningbing leaves, Xiaoyu stays inside to work on his writing. Since she won't be back for lunch, he happily orders some takeout. After finishing, he quickly tidies up and takes out the trash. In the afternoon, he follows his routine of shipping out the items he sold. While out buying ingredients at the supermarket, he suddenly realizes that his current life doesn't seem that different from his previous one. Just as he's thinking this, an older woman nearby strikes up a conversation. She recognizes him as the young man from the incident with the toxic girl. She asks if he's out buying groceries, and he politely confirms that he's picking up a few things to cook dinner tonight. The woman praises him, noting that few young men cook these days. She tells him his wife is truly lucky to have married him. He modestly demurs, explaining that since she is busy with work, he handles more of the housework. To him, it's only fair. He tells the woman that meeting Ningbing was actually his good fortune. The woman remarks that as long as one is grateful, life will be good. She tells him that having such thoughts at a young age is rare. If his wife is just as grateful as he is, their future will surely brighten. He simply smiles and picks out a good head of broccoli. But just as he turns toward the tomatoes, a familiar figure appears. Ningbing has appeared beside him, asking what he's doing there. She explains she finished early and came to buy a few things when she spotted him.